All right, let's get you across now. Developments in the United States, where Judge Ketanji Brown-Jackson is on the cusp of making history. Now, should she be confirmed as the first black woman justice of the country's Supreme Court? She went through confirmation hearings this week where Republican politicians were accused of turning the process into a farce because of some of their questions. Let's talk about this week's events with Seeham Semai from the Women's Legal Center, where she's director, as well as Siviwe Rikhotso from the African Center for the Study of the U.S. My thanks to you both. Welcome to the program. Seeham, if I can begin with you, why has it taken the United States so long to have a woman even nominated for a position, a black woman that is, nominated for a position on the Supreme Court?
Thank you very much for having the Women's Legal Center, Jim. Yes, I mean, I wouldn't say it's quite a surprise because, I mean, the U.S. Supreme Court only have about 70 black women who served as federal judges. And we also know that there's a lot of attrition of black women generally within the legal profession. And we could see from the interviews that there were major challenges for black women actually pushing through the ceiling. And I think that much more could be done by America, but I think that the first step which President Biden did was to appoint the first black woman judge. And everybody know that she is overqualified for that particular position, where she's moved through various processes in the legal profession. And it's quite significant, and I hope that the U.S. will continue on that trajectory and ensure that minority groups are represented in the highest courts.
Just on the point you're making about the interviews, because the interviews were controversial in parts, especially some of the questions from the Republican politicians who were part of the panel. How did you assess the way in which they posed those questions and the issues they chose to focus on, Seeham?
Well, it remains, I mean, the issues that Judge Jackson has gone through, many women has gone through. And the challenges is that there will be opposition, there will be barriers, and I'm glad that these were the type of questions that were asked so that people can see that these are the challenges that black women or minority groups have to face before they are appointed.
And Siviwe, was this a fair chance for the judge to prove herself as a candidate for the Supreme Court bench in the United States? Was it a process fitting of the process, well, not a process fitting of the process, but a process, an interview process fitting of the objective, which is ultimately to reach the best possible candidate for the job?
Well, thank you so much, Tembekile, for having me here. So to that question, I would say that the process itself is fitting. I suppose the issue here would be the questions raised during those public hearings, which many of them did not necessarily allude to her work in the legal fraternity, but mainly had political squabbles within the Democratic and Republican camps. So it was rather not surprising that it would go this way, especially for Republican senators who questioned her during the public hearing. Right? But I suppose that with what we've seen and what we can be happy about is her responses to the questions posed towards her in the hearings, which really reflect not just her experience within the judiciary of the United States, but her capability to stand for this specific appointment that she's been nominated for. So I think here we will be quite skeptical and scrutinize the manner in which the proceedings have gone through in the last 2 weeks, but happy as well with the responses that she has given in some of these questions, as well as the support from major and known legal representatives within the judiciary of the United States, and questioning some of the manner in the ways in which the hearings had proceeded. But I think to agree with what Seeham has said, is that this is not surprising at all. And I this will surely now have an impact on future appointments and nominees, women of color, minority groups within the United States, who will then also be nominated for such positions. But I suppose we can be happy as well, as I said, with the responses towards these questions.
And Siviwe, just on the point you're making about the politics, right? Politics in the appointment of Supreme Court judges in the United States is not a new thing. It even goes as far as Republican presidents appointing judges who are either clear in the fact that they've got Republican leanings and Democrats doing the same. But I wonder if that politicization of the bench of the Supreme Court in the United States is the best thing for the judiciary for a democracy, Siviwe.
Well, certainly not. It is not, and unfortunately, at the present moment now, what we're seeing here with the committee handling these processes, the proceedings rather, is that we're seeing a slight majority-minority representation between the two camps, with the Republicans having major or majority representation within the committee. So we unfortunately we cannot escape this politicization, as much as we'd like to have it drawn out from the proceedings, because this is not just a matter of politics. This is a matter of integrity, an appointment on one of the highest courts in the United States, right? So we'd want to have questions leaning towards legal administration or administration of the judiciary, right, as opposed to having political influences and leanings in these questions. But I suppose what we can also see that this is synonymous of America, where we see it seems to be going towards some type of progress, right? So whether it's on appointment of African American candidates or women of color, just females in specific positions within the United States. And we see there that this acts as a shock for the U.S., right? Because we see this divide between progressives and conservatives. So unfortunately, we cannot escape it, because even then within the Supreme Court itself, we'll find that judges leaning either towards a Republican or Democrat camp, right? And some of their practices and decisions, unfortunately, might be scrutinized to having been influenced by those leanings. So it is quite difficult to separate the politics from this proceedings of appointment of Supreme Court justices.
Seeham, any parallels for you in these confirmation interviews for Judge Ketanji Brown and how women jurists and lawyers in this country are treated?
Well, I mean, I think that we could bring the analogy between obviously what happened at the JSC and also the challenges that was raised around broader political interference. But some would say that that is the political landscape in terms of the judges, the higher courts. And yes, it is problematic because many issues which does not affect the legal profession or the bench are raised because of particular interest, political interest. However, I do think that the U.S. obviously is on the correct trajectory because minority groups need to be presented. And I cannot overemphasize that. There's high levels of attrition of black or, like I said, minority groups. And it's important for America, who deems itself as the democracy in the world, that they need to be able to project and reflect minority groups on the highest courts. And I think that must go beyond the issue of politics, whether or not you're Republican or whether or not it's Democrats. The issue of gender and racial transformation is critical for the bench because the challenge is that otherwise how are you going to look at the lived realities of those minorities? How is judgment going to come out at the end of the day? And a lot of work needs to be done on in America around broadly the representation of minorities. But I think that, with the appointment of Judge Jackson, where she has come through the pipeline, and I think it's important, where it was indicated in many interviews that she has also gone through, which many black women, even in South Africa, has gone through, which is bullying, which is various challenges within the legal profession, and she's pushed through. And I think that in itself is an example, but it's a lot of responsibility for Judge Jackson to be able to be the first black woman, and that we hope that there will be many more to come.
And as historic as her confirmation would be for the United States, and whenever there is a historic appointment, even outside of the judiciary, sometimes there's obviously the understandable excitement, a new hope given, especially in recent years, to black people, to women as well. But there's also, to a degree, an unfairness, isn't it, Seeham, that when your appointment is historic, it'll immediately birth a change, because it does take a while. The presence of one person is not enough to have a rapid change often in these complicated systems.
Yes. They need to continue with trajectory. The appointment of one black justice to the Supreme Court is not enough, not for a democracy like the US. And if the attrition rate of minority groups it's quite high, and something more needs to be done by the US government to ensure that minority groups come through.
Let me come back to you, Siviwe. Any lessons then that we could draw and apply to our own judiciary, as far as from what we're seeing in the US from the confirmation process and how the rest of it is running?
Well, I wouldn't say necessarily lessons, because comparing the two countries would be rather unfair on South Africa, given that it's quite a young democracy compared to the United States. And even then, we see that the United States is still struggling. And we're seeing this pattern here, as I had alluded to earlier, that whenever there seems to be progress moving forward, whether it's the appointment of a president, of a vice president, whether appointments within the judiciary or other important positions within the United States landscape, we see that after a number of years from those historical watershed moments, we see this regression where we see appointments of individuals who are rather very conservative, who are very nationalist, who have a narrow sense of points and views as to how the United States should be governed domestically and internationally. So I suppose what we can try to adhere to, or just try to translate to South Africa, is that one thing is true, that we need to be patient with our process moving forward, right? Whether it's an appointment of a Chief Justice in the Supreme Court, whether it's an appointment of a president of South Africa, we need to be patient so as to avoid making those mistakes which we could have been avoided, right? Which could have been avoided rather, right? But having said that, I do think South Africa has shown its adaptability in both the domestic and international landscape, right? Having worked as a democracy up to now, of course, having its own glitches and problems here and there, but looking set to recover and fix those issues, right? And I think now what we've seen here with a nominee or nomination of Justice or Judge Semai is that South Africa may be ready for a female Chief Justice. It may even be ready for a female president. But I suppose we'll have to just take what would apply from such examples as the United States and be honest with ourselves that we need to be patient, but as well we do not need to make excuses for the lack of movement, right, or lack of progress in terms of South Africa as a society, whether it's in the judiciary, political landscape, wherever. But we see that here South Africa is a young democracy, and it is quite adaptive to changes that will otherwise shock or put other nations in a regressive state as we've seen with America over the last few years, drawing parallels, at least from the nomination of Thurgood Marshall as the first African-American judge at the Supreme Court, to the presidency of Barack Obama, as well as the second nomination of Judge Clarence Thomas, which spans at least 15 to 16 years difference there. And after that, we see this regression again from the presidency of Donald Trump and the nomination of Brett Kavanaugh as an associate judge in the Supreme Court of Appeal. So we'll draw those different parallels and try to at least dissuade South Africa from moving towards an aggressive state.
Thank you very much for that.
In terms, yes.
Siviwe, Rikhotso, as well as Seeham Semai speaking to us today about the looming confirmation. At this point, it appears that it will be pretty much a done deal for the Democrats in the U.S. of the Judge Ketanji Brown-Jackson. My thanks to you both for your time this afternoon.